I've pretty much always considered myself a gamer. I think I was about 6 years old when I played my first video game at a friend's house. And I remember being so jealous that they got this awesome device that they could play whenever they wanted. And a year later, I got one of these, the Donkey Kong Game & Watch. So the controls on this were fairly straightforward. There was a button on the right to jump up and down, and there was a pad on the left to go left and right. And you controlled Mario from Super Mario Brothers and had to avoid the barrels that Donkey Kong, this giant monkey, was throwing at you. And there wasn't much to learn about the game. It took a while to master and to score an actual high score, but the rules of the game were fairly simple. Now, throughout my life, I've played a lot of games, and as technologies have evolved and graphics have gotten better, the games have become more and more complex. There are so many games out there right now that require you to actually put time and effort into fully mastering the game. So my favorite example of this is Horizon Zero Dawn. And in the game, you need to battle and hunt robot animals. And it starts off with these reasonable small creatures that you can kill with a single arrow shot. But as the game goes on, the creatures become larger and meaner and much trickier to kill. And it actually takes a lot of time before you're able to take down the biggest robots. It's a game where you really need to master the different weapons and understand the different qualities of the robots that you're hunting. So as games have gotten more complex, game designers put way more time into creating environments where players are happy, engaged, and willing to put the time and effort into learning and mastering all these skills. And I realize it's not unlike the work that I do in creating environments for developers where they're happy, engaged, and willing to learn and master the skills that they want to. So as mentioned in the intro, I'm an engineering manager at FutureLearn, and we're a social learning platform offering online courses, programs, and degrees. So our company really cares about learning, and it shouldn't be a surprise that that's reflected internally as well. So I've been at this company for 6.5 years now, and I joined the company as an engineer, but I've seen our tech team grow from a tiny team of 6 engineers to the 36 that we are today. And as a tech team, part of our strategy is to grow our own software engineers. So since our entire company is about learning, we believe that we should invest in our people. So when possible, when we have the capacity, we should try to hire less experienced people rather than hiring only the most senior software engineers. It does mean, though, that we really need to make sure that our team is constantly capable of leveling up and having those processes and structures in place that enable people to do that. So the way I see it is that as a manager, I'm responsible for the internal developer experience. So from the time a person applies for a job with us, to their onboarding and entire time at the company, all the way to when they decide to leave, we need to make sure that people have the best experience that they can have. And I've been full-time focused on this for 2.5 to 3 years now. And the more I do this, the more I realize that this is just another variation of user experience. So it's all about understanding the motivations, emotions, and behaviors of people and providing the best experience that you can for them. So I wanted to specifically focus here on game user experience because I think it's a very similar type of environment that we're trying to create. So an environment where people are engaged and focused on learning and mastering specific skills. So that's pretty much what this talk is about. I'll be looking at 8 lessons that we can learn from game design and how we can apply them to teams. So one thing to note here is I'm not talking about gamification here. So this isn't about making your time at a company more like a game where you score points and there's a leaderboard for most kick-ass developer. So it's not about anything like that. it's not about how we can gamify work. It's about using analogies from game user experience to better understand how we can make the developer experience better. So to structure this talk a bit more, I'll look at 3 different areas of game design, and within those areas, I'll highlight different game examples, what lessons we can learn from them, and how to apply those lessons in a team with some practical examples of what my team does. So our first area is starting a game. So I mentioned an example earlier of the Donkey Kong game, where the controls were purely left, right, and jump. So nowadays, games much more complex than that. So this is an overview of the game controls of Uncharted. And even though I've played this game, I'm kind of overwhelmed by the amount of things that you can actually do. But most games, though, they won't just drop you into the game and go, right, off you go, figure it out. Almost every game nowadays has a phased introduction of the various game mechanics. So in Uncharted, each of the controls get introduced one at a time. So in Uncharted 4, so one of the first encounters is with this random guy on the right, where you learn how to punch. And you get this little message telling you to hit square to hit him. Later on, you get another scene where you learn how to interact with an object by pressing triangle. And eventually, in similar ways, you learn how to dodge, jump, climb, and shoot a gun, until you're able to do all the base actions. And in this game, it's done fairly quickly. Within the first half an hour, you've pretty much learned the core mechanics, but it's still staged in such a way that you focus on one skill at a time. So lesson number 1 is don't overload new starters. So when someone new joins, they've got a lot to learn. New people, new ways of working, new code base, new terminology, new abbreviations. So come up with a way to stage your onboarding and actually plan it out more deliberately. So the main thing that we have is an onboarding checklist that we create for each starter. So we have an onboarding template in Trello, which we regularly update. And the week before a new starter starts, we create a copy and customize it. So it's all about allowing a new starter to have one starting point where they can find all the info that they need to get started. So going back to video games, another thing to note when starting a new game is who is responsible for teaching the new skills. So a lot of the early games would come with a manual that exactly explained what each button did and how the game worked, how you win the game. And I remember playing games where I just kind of skimmed the manual, just threw it away, went, I can do this, I'm smart. And only discovered that a certain move was possible, like months and months later, after actually talking to a friend who had also played it. So at the time, the onus was very much on the player to figure it out. So most games now, though, embed that onboarding aspect into the game. The game is the one responsible for teaching the new thing. So going back to Uncharted, it's just a simple hovering message, but it is a hovering message that won't disappear until you've actually hit that button. So the game itself goes, right, now it's time to learn something. We're not going to let you go on until you have actually done that. So lesson number 2 is support and guide new starters. So it's all well and good to have an onboarding plan and checklist, but you don't want your new starter to go at it completely alone. So whenever someone new starts, we pair them up with a mentor, and the mentor is on their same team and sits close by to them, and is there to help support and guide the new starter during the first few months. So they don't necessarily have to pair directly on the work together, but the mentor is supposed to make sure that the new starter has something to work on and is around for any questions that they might have, and just generally should be the first point of contact that the new starter can go to. And we make sure that they regularly catch up and together come up with a plan for anything that additionally needs to go into that onboarding checklist. So the second area that we're going to look at is how games help with learning new skills. So one of the most important aspects of learning something new is understanding whether or not what you're doing is the right or wrong way of doing it. So typically games are pretty good at providing feedback in some way. And I struggled actually with coming up with an example of a game that did it really badly. So going back to Uncharted again, it's quite low key in this case. So once you've pressed the square button, that message just disappears. And a lot of the other type of feedback in the game is the same type of feedback that you'd expect in real life. So if you misjudge a jump and miss a ledge, you basically fall to your death and die. Kind of like real life. Not kind of, actually real life. Don't jump like that. Anyway, if you shoot at an enemy, he bleeds and then dies. We might not really think of it as feedback, but the game is actively telling you that an action that you did had an actual immediate effect. So lesson number 3 is give people direct and timely feedback. So when possible, we want to encourage our team members to give each other direct and immediate feedback. Especially when it's constructive feedback, it needs to be delivered in a timely manner and with specific examples. It's part of my role as a manager to facilitate that this happens. So one of the things that I tend to do is just making myself available for whenever someone wants to prepare for a conversation with someone else, or wants to role play to trial out how to actually say stuff. Because it's hard, this type of stuff. And there are 2 books that I found that really help with getting people to think about feedback. So the first is Difficult Conversations, which is all about approaching conversations and structuring them better so the points that you're trying to make just have a better impact. And it's not just a useful book for difficult conversations. Any conversations or communications that you have will benefit from this. So think about the dialogue that you're having with someone when you're pairing, and explicitly thinking about what impact your words have on the other person. So the second book is from the same writers, and it's called Thanks for the Feedback. So it's written more from the point of view of being able to hear and take in feedback, and understand what the various triggers are that you might have making you react to feedback. So I thought I was quite open and understanding about receiving feedback, but when I read this book, I did it right before I was getting my annual review. And I noticed myself reacting and dismissing some of the things that people had said in exactly the way the book said I would. So it's a really useful book to get better at this type of stuff. So going back to Uncharted, at this stage of the game, you normally also can't die. That guy on the right will just stand there waiting for you to actually punch him. And you can't die from the punches that he gives you back. Is that the right way? Yeah. Anyway, so until you learn, the game is set up to ease you into kind of learning and applying these type of skills. So another example is Mass Effect, where you can go to a shooting range to try out different weapons and powers without dealing with any actual enemies shooting back at you. So again, you can't die, and it allows you to trial out and learn how to master specific skills. So lesson number 4 is provide opportunities to apply new skills. So at FutureLearn, every person has a training budget, which isn't uncommon, but we really try to get people thinking about how they'll use their budget in a way that works for them. So while I love conferences, I know not everyone finds them as useful. And I often suspect that we encourage people to use their budget on conferences because it's kind of the easy thing to do. And it's up to me as a manager to help identify what other types of training are out there. Things like improv workshops, writing or public speaking courses, getting a trainer in for a day, finding a mentor. We need to be the ones to find and offer the opportunities that people can use their budget on. Beyond that, though, we also make it explicit that people get personal development time and during their normal work hours. We make it a default that everyone on the team should be spending half a day per sprint on learning and developing themselves. So some people might require more time, other people less time, but having that default explicit means that we're setting that expectation that people should be learning and growing. So one of the things that people can spend their time on are our different learning events. So these are regular internal events that are mostly self-organized for people to get together and learn something in different ways. And that's just a bunch of the ones that we do. And if you're interested in this, come and find me during the break. And then finally, we also have book clubs and course clubs. So for people who want to read a book or take an online course. And they meet up regularly to discuss the progress that they're making and how to apply what they've learned to their work. So the final area that we're looking at is the actual leveling up of a character. Now, not all games allow you to do this, but there are a lot of role-playing, action, and even racing games nowadays that have some form of leveling. And there are a lot of different ways that games have implemented this ability to level up. So in this section, I really wanted to look at some of the variations and the effect that they have on the player. So the basic concept of leveling up is this. Your character starts at a specific level. You gain experience by doing things in the game, like battling enemies, finding treasure, stuff like that. So some games will call this experience points, other skill points, action points. Each game comes up with their own random thing to call it, but they all mean the same thing. It's a way to increase your level. Now, up until this stage, I think most games are quite consistent. There are some exceptions, but the majority of games with leveling up will follow this type of pattern. Where they're different is with what happens when you reach that next level. So the simplest version is where you reach the next level, your character becomes stronger in some predefined set way. So for instance, in Kingdom Hearts, which is a game where you meet various Disney characters, and Goofy and Donald Duck are your sidekicks, each level up is associated with a specific increase or ability. So the picture in the top right shows a message that Goofy is now level 3, and therefore his defense has increased. So with level 4, his strength will increase. With level 5, he unlocks a special ability. So no matter who you are, where you're playing, every person will get these increases. So in this type of leveling, with each level up, you get a specific increase that the game has preset, but it's a way to celebrate your character getting stronger and progressing through the game. So lesson number 5 is acknowledge people's growth. So I'm always surprised to hear that there are still companies out there where they'll only give salary increases if a person asks and lobbies for it themselves. In my opinion, you should start off with the assumption that your engineers will learn and grow, and you should be always taking the time to review and adjust their salaries accordingly. So we do salary reviews for every person every year. Most of the time, we'll at least try to give an inflationary increase, and then depending on the person and the progress that they've made, they'll get a small, medium, or large increase. And with each review, we also compare the salaries of the people in the team with comparable skills and experience. So it's making sure that we're always being fair and consistent across the entire team. So none of this is dependent on how well someone is able to advocate for themselves. So back to games. And the next type of leveling up all allow the player a choice to what happens when they level up. So in the first variation of this, the player gets to choose themselves which stat or attribute to increase. So one example of this is Dark Souls, which is pictured. So the values here in blue are all the attributes that the player can choose to invest in and increase. In these games, it's really, really important to know what each attribute means, how it affects you, and how you can apply it in the game. So lesson 6 is expose basic competencies and what they're used for. So we've got several sets of competencies based on what role you have. So we started with the ones for software engineers, which are curiosity, communication, technical skills, teamwork skills, and initiative. And we use these whenever we're hiring and interviewing to make sure that we're always taking all of those areas into account and that we're, again, consistent and fair in how we're discussing people. And then we also have more advanced competencies for the more experienced roles in the team. And again, we can use these in conversations about career progression, during salary reviews, or when providing feedback. Having those competencies means that we're framing those discussions with the attributes that we value and care about. Plus, we have a common agreed on language to discuss these type of things. So the next way a character can level up is by choosing a special ability rather than a stat to increase. And this is where skill trees and pathways appear in games. So this is Horizon Zero Dawn again. And at the start of the game, you have the skills that are all in that first row. Each time you level up, you gain skill points and you can exchange those points to unlock whichever skill you want. You are bound to the order of the ones that are connected, so you can't unlock something in the third row if you haven't unlocked the things in front of it. In the end, though, all the players end up with unlocking everything in this tree. It's very much up to you, though, to decide which order you unlock them, but you always end up with everything if you stick with the game. So a similar example of this is the latest Tomb Raider. So it's just a different way of visualizing it, but a similar thing applies. You can only invest in the skills adjacent to the ones you already have, and you end up with all of these skills at the end of the game. Another approach is where it's much more modular. So this is Mass Effect Andromeda, and in here, you're never expected to unlock all these skills. There's just not enough points for it. You can only invest in a certain number of them, and it's up to you to decide what type of character you want to create. And it very much depends on your style of playing what the right decisions for you are. A similar version of this is the latest Assassin's Creed. And this I find really funny because both me and my husband play this, but we have very different playing styles and end up with very different skills to unlock. So he wouldn't be able to play with my character, and I wouldn't be able to play with his character, because it's very much dependent on our own gameplay. So lesson number 7 is allow people to choose their own path. And what I mean with that is allowing people to generalize or specialize whichever way they want. So we used to have front-end and back-end engineers, but a few years back we got rid of that title and turned it into just software engineers. We noticed that having those labels were creating unnecessary barriers, and we didn't really acknowledge that the different types of skills that people had that weren't covered by those two areas. So rather than expect everyone to be full stack, or that everyone fits nicely in a front-end or back-end box, we're giving people the opportunity to choose what skills they want to invest in. So we've recently introduced the spreadsheet where people can say how comfortable they are in specific areas. And we mainly use this for figuring out the makeup of teams and ensuring we balance the skills the right way. And we use it for people to find out who on the team they should ask for help for when dealing with something. So it's a way to visualize all the different types of experience that we actually have. So finally, what all these games do are visualizing and explaining how to progress in the game. They're all quite different styles, and there's quite a lot of complexity in each of them. But all of these accomplish getting the player familiar with what is possible and allowing them to compare and understand what might be right for them. So final lesson is visualize what progression looks like. So we introduced a career development framework last year, a career progression framework, and it's gone through various iterations. So the first one we had was very linear, so similar to the first games that we looked at, where everyone was expected to progress in a similar way, just one level at a time, and eventually unlocking everything. We realized, though, that didn't really work for us, and decided to go for a much more modular approach. Plus, we realized we really wanted to link the entire thing to our competencies and to our different roles. So this is an overview of our framework. There's a lot going on in there, which I won't go into right now. But again, if you're interested in this, come and find me during the break. So the idea of the progression framework is it's really used to We use it as a tool to have those discussions about career progression with people, and for people to plan and figure out what they next should focus on, in the same way that video games allow people to see where they are and what is possible for them. So those are 8 lessons of game design that we can apply to building cultures where people are engaged and motivated to learn, progress, and level up. So, to recap, don't overload new starters, support and guide new starters, give people direct and timely feedback, provide opportunities to apply new skills, acknowledge people's growth, expose basic competencies and how they're used, allow people to choose their own path, and visualize what progression looks like. So as a manager, my main focus is in creating developer experiences. So I think in the busyness and hecticness of what managers do, it's easy to lose sight that in a way, our developers are our stakeholders. And we are the ones that should be creating experiences for them that allow them to grow, progress, and level up. So if you're a manager, try to do this type of stuff. If you're not, it's not unreasonable to ask your manager whether they can provide some of this stuff. So creating better developer experiences are the way we can make not only our companies better, but also the people that are in our teams trying to grow, learn, and progress. So that's it. Thank you for listening.